So I'm W. Jason Miller. I'm a professor in the Department of English, and my connection to when MLK met the KKK in Raleigh is that I did the originating research for it, shared the information with campus over the last 3 or 4 years, and really documented the complex history of King's visit to NC State University in 1966. So I had been doing research on Martin Luther King for a number of years, starting about 2010. Because of that, the campus was very interested in understanding when and what happened when Martin Luther King came to campus in 1966.
When I was here at NC State, I do not remember anybody talking about the fact that King had come to Reynolds Coliseum, but I would not have been surprised because iconic figures like MLK and Malcolm X, they were really popular on the collegiate speaking circuit as sought after speakers, sold out auditoriums and people, standing room only to come and hear these people talk.
I wanted to have a MLK celebration at NC State. The NCSU MLK campus commemoration. And I remember the first speaker was Yolanda King. And then it was followed by her sister, and getting to have those up close conversations with them was just mesmerizing. I was reading a Buddhist that said joy and sorrow coexist, and that's what I felt when you told me about Dr. King being here, and when I saw the exhibit that was in the African American Cultural Center. I had no idea. It would have been in the introduction of every MLK campus commemoration. His children would have loved to know that. And I felt that I cheated them because I didn't know.
So the university approached me and said, Jason, could you find out some of this background information of what's going on? And it was connected to the renovation at Reynolds Coliseum, because they wanted to recognize important events that had taken place on campus. I had never wanted to do any research on the KKK in my life. However, what I did is I started by realizing that there was no archive on campus anywhere for Dr. King's visit. There's several reasons for that. Reynolds Coliseum at the time was kind of a community space. It was used by lots of folks around town besides those associated with NC State. Second of all, Martin Luther King came in July. The technician was not here, students were not here, faculty was away. And then third, because the KKK staged an 1,800-person march on the same day to intimidate him right down Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh, nobody really wanted to revisit that history. So I realized that the News and Observer newspaper had taken photographs of what happened that day. And I went down to the state archives on Jones Street, and I found an envelope that had actual rubber bands around it, and it was filled with negatives of photographs, not even developed photographs. So I took a giant magnifying glass, looked through the negatives, and I saw that the News and Observer had devoted 8 photographers to cover the KKK march, and not one photographer from their own staff to cover Martin Luther King's visit. What was before me was 150 undeveloped photographs of the KKK march that day. And so by looking at that, I was able to recreate what children were doing, what the event was like, and seeing Klansmen with their faces exposed in full regalia marching in broad daylight. It was incredibly startling. Like so many people, I had seen images of the Klan with full hoods on at nighttime with burning crosses. And so in many ways, that's kind of the originating image many of us have of Klansmen. To see them in broad daylight with their faces exposed, with their hands on children that were sometimes as young as 3 or 4 years old, was absolutely startling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Not only that, the intimidation factor was unbelievable. You have to remember that on July 31st, 1966, was probably the day that Raleigh was the most armed and ready for battle of any of its entire history. 150 National Guardsmen had been called in, including state police and county police, but then the KKK brought their own group of people known as security guards. And they had gold helmets with the letters SG on them, giant flashlights that weren't used for looking at the light in the daytime, and these huge black boots in full camo. And so these security guards marching around created a level of intimidation that is really startling. And you could see photo after photo of them marching. Then, to place them in downtown Raleigh, right down Fayetteville Street, side by side in broad daylight, there were so many cars, nobody could even drive down Fayetteville Street. At first, when I found the research, I thought that was because the Klan stopped them, but what actually happened is people showed up an hour and a half beforehand to get the best view. 10 and 12 deep along the sidewalks, and then every space taken on Fayetteville Street with parked cars with their engines off, not because they couldn't get through, because they were there to see this demonstration of the KKK.
I remember when I first walked in and looked at the expressions of the people's faces, it reminded me of being at my best friend's wedding in 1992 at First Baptist Church and seeing the Klan march while she was getting married. So the juxtaposition of that happened inside. There's unity, union. Right outside the door, there's hatred and division. My daughter, who's a graduate of NC State, one of your students, said to me at the time she was in middle school, she said, "Mommy, are they going to put a bomb in this church?" And I said, "No." And I said, "But I want you to see it, because I want you to see what this looks like." And she was so afraid. And I wondered if it was the right thing to do, but I didn't want this moment lost. So when I saw that, that's what it reminded me of. It reminded me first of privilege of people that can watch something like that, but don't have my history, so they don't have that fear. That it's just an event. It's something to talk about. But for me, it is pain. It is anger. It is my daughter having fear. The fact that it's known gives me the power to talk about it and know about it. And when you know about it, you can take some of the fear back. I can't take the fear of my ancestors back, but I can surely try to make it right by empowering my grandboys. So it was a tsunami of emotion. So you can't change what happened, but you can empower the now.
After we organized an event on campus, it was at the African American Cultural Center, it was in cooperation with the libraries in 2020, a man came forward. His name is Marshall Wyatt. And Marshall came forward and said, "I think I have something you might be interested in." I had found the still photographs undeveloped as negatives, and we digitized those and made those available. But Marshall had rolling Super 8 color film footage. Now, to think of having color images in 1966 is quite startling. And all of a sudden you see the Grand Dragon's robe stand out. All of a sudden you see the gold shining off the helmets. All of a sudden you see the real colors and the Confederate flag patches on their elbows and shoulders. And it's an entirely different sense of movement, direction, and involvement of what is taking place on that day. Most startling of all, Marshall Wyatt's father, Edgar Wyatt, went home after the rally and he turned that camera on his television because Martin Luther King's speech in Reynolds Coliseum had been broadcast across the state on public broadcasting system. And so he turned his camera to the television, and it is the only footage we have of Martin Luther King speaking. Now, for me to have seen this after searching every radio station, talking to the president of PBS, David Crabtree, and others trying to find these things, and then to realize that this history existed where? In somebody's basement of their home, that's where it had been documented. And that took the research to an entirely new level, because now we could actually see the inspirational voice and movements of Martin Luther King, and we could actually see the KKK moving right down Fayetteville Street. So the images are so startling to me as a researcher, because when I get into Martin Luther King's world, I'm usually dealing with papers, his letters, his personal writings, and certainly his audio. But no audio exists from that day, because newspaper reporters had the strangest habit. They would set up their recording equipment, they would record the day's event, write their story, and they would tape over the tape the next day, day after day, because the tape belonged to the newspaper or the network, and they did it so often they didn't distinguish between what was unique and not unique. So there is no audio anywhere of Dr. King speaking, and so the visual elements are actually more startling and tell a different story than even an archival piece of paper can, or that even audio can. And the images themselves tell a story of a complete time period. I mean, when you look at the pictures, you'll see an unbelievable event of people actually selling hot dogs and peanuts when the Klan is getting to come together. That's never going to be on a piece of audio, and that's never going to be an archival file on a piece of paper. Startling in every event is seeing this moving imagery of the Klan moving. Just their outright confidence, how brazen they are, moving past these landmarks on Fayetteville Street. But then finally to see Dr. King on the television, because what we had was something completely out of balance. The archive had covered the KKK, the KKK, the KKK, and Dr. King was relegated to just a couple photographs and a couple images. But to have him on television brings it all the way back to this moment where you realize the whole state is actually watching him. And you get this moment in time where people had to adjust the bunny ears on their television, when they sat on their couches, when there was only 3 or 4 stations to watch, and you realize the archive lied to us. Dr. King had a greater impact that day. He reached more people, and his resonance of what he accomplished far outweighed anything the KKK did.
Number one, it's a source of great pride to know that Dr. King visited NC State. It's also a source of great pride for me and our faculty, and you in particular, for uncovering video evidence of his visit. I mean, there were 5,000 people in attendance. It's just a great time for NC State University to celebrate one of our nation's most iconic leaders, and to dig up the history and to relive this history, and to bring people out of the woodwork that may have attended the event. I mean, it's a great source of pride for NC State.
When you told me about this, I started just thinking about the impact of being erased intentionally, because that's how an unjust system works. It will erase it and make you think it didn't happen, and then it's gone for good. But I know it happened, and I know there are many it's in history to be uncovered. So we all have a responsibility to tell our story. Everybody's story has meaning, it has power.
I'm thinking about Dr. Lawrence Clark, who used to work at NC State a number of years ago, when he says, until lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And the same thing here, until we get more voices telling the stories, you may not be getting the entire picture. The end result might be the same thing, that lion is mounted on somebody's wall. But then if they were telling the story, you would hear about the historic fight of the lion before he or she was taken down by the hunter. And again, letting folks know there's more to the story and the dimensions of it than you really think about. But trying to find, I think, additional ways to bridge the past with the present for young people, and to get them to see the importance. And a lot of things that they think are new and novel, they might be novel, but they're certainly not new. A lot of this goes around kind of in a cyclical manner.
So this means so much to NC State's University because of the fact that we often think of history being far away and out of sight. The reality is that the history of Martin Luther King is near and within reach. When we talk about Martin Luther King Day, we don't have to talk about faraway events in the March on Washington, Washington, D.C. We don't have to talk about what he did down in Selma. We don't even have to cover things about Birmingham. We can say what happened when he was right here on campus in 1906, and it's incredibly powerful. Moreover, we don't even have to wait for MLK Day, right? This is our history, and we teach and educate folks on a daily basis about what goes on here. So if you're bringing Martin Luther King into your classroom, if you're talking about the civil rights movement, this is a way to personalize it and really bring it to light.
As our alumni learn more about Dr. King's visit to NC State, they'll be reminded it was not just the Rolling Stones that performed in Reynolds Coliseum. Martin Luther King was there. And at a really pivotal time in his leadership for our country. And what I admire most about Dr. King, and this will remind our alumni and why people will continue to be inspired by his message of hope. And I mean, he dared to dream of a different reality. And unfortunately, we still have those same dreams, and we still have so much work to do. So what I'm hopeful for is that your team and your collaborative approach to uncovering the video of his visit and reminding us all of his message will continue to remind us of the work that we have ahead.
It's so important to know the history or know people who will uncover what was meant to be erased.
I think the MLK Commemoration Day plays a big role in celebrations, helping to highlight the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and access. I would throw in another letter in the alphabet soup of DEI, access and belonging, belonging. Because you can let people in the door, you can allow them to sit anywhere they like, but unless you feel this sense of belonging, that I'm here and I really feel like I belong, I've got the opportunity, once you allow me to come into the dance, to pick the music that's going to be played, at the dance, and the folks who are there are welcoming me and that sort of thing. So I think more than anything, if we're going to learn anything and help to make some progress with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I guess coming from a history background, you've got to understand your history so that you do not repeat it. History is only as good as your ability to use it as a tool to help you understand what's going on, not only in the past, but to make sense of the present, and also to help you predict. If it tells us nothing else, help us predict what might happen in the months and years to come. So a commemoration is so important to get people to pause and remember what's happened and what's still left to be done. Because if you ask that question, there's always something people would tell you is still left to be done.
So the hardest part of seeing this event, of engaging with when MLK and the KKK met in Raleigh, is the initial shock. The shock is the same for me, it's the same for others, it's the same for everyone that has a chance to look at these images. But after the images overwhelm us, we start to walk away and start to realize how we can reckon with this, how we can complicate those old simple divisions we fall into, and how we can really reconcile in our own mind this fact of how distant is this past and how close is it. So I think the big takeaway from an event like this is there's going to be an initial shock. That needs to lead to some real complicated discussions, some moments to revisit what's going on, and I think ultimately making a decision. Are we going to forget and let this history pass, or are we somehow going to make sure we don't lose track of it again? Because recording this and demonstrating this says a lot about our own intentionality and our own directions in terms of where we hope to be going as a city, a state, and a university.